lads. How we doing?
Good. Big. How are we?
Oh, not too bad. Just a bit of change of scenery this episode. I've got a clock in the background, so you guys can see the time.
You know what?
And
I like it. I really do. It's the perfect scenery, unlike this, Golden State motherfucker over here. But
Yeah. San Fran. It'd be funny actually
San
when
Fran.
we see the clock and we'll like clearly edit it, and we'll be chatting, and then out of nowhere we'll be like there.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Cool. Yeah. So today we're talking about variation. Is that right?
Variation.
The spice of life.
The spice of life. Cool. All right. So we'll basically just like put it out there. What's your guys' what do you want me to start? Like what my definition of variation is when
Let's
I look
go
at variation.
Prantik. I can see Prantik.
Let's go Prantik.
He's like 6 a.m. He's ready to go. Prantik.
All right,
what
all
does
right.
variation mean to you and your soul?
Oh my god. Variation to me and my soul is sleep. The type of sleep. The more hours
That
you
ain't
get,
happening.
that's variation. But that ain't happening when you're hustling. So this is the Hustle for the Muscle podcast.
Variation. Are we talking about your no? We're not talking about your women needs. We're talking about training here, mate.
Every day I'm shuffling. But yeah. So good morning, everyone. Good night in Australia. Okay, variation early 7 a.m. in the morning. Let's get it. Okay, variation to me is actually changing in training pattern. It differs from different people. For me, variation has been my game plan for a long time. I really like it. And here I would like to quote one of the biggest bodybuilders, Lee Priest. From the land of Down Under. So Lee Priest always mentioned that always try out whatever works for you, and this is where I think variation comes in. So when you're trying out what works for you, you try different types of workout, be it workout with giant sets, drop sets, super sets, and all sorts of stuff that's available on the market right now. People do all sorts of crazy stuff. But as long as you know what your limit is and vary it, and then you know what to do and the correct way to do it, then that's good variation. So to me, variation is actually performing different types of exercises over different periods of time to gain a positive result at the end of the day or the month or the period that you're looking for.
Good. I like that.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was a good way to put it. I was just, pretty much along those lines. Like to me, variation is just, the manipulation of, those training variables that you were discussing just then, to create a long-term, training response. So, like what you said, Prantik, just different intensity techniques. We can talk about variation in exercise selection, and like it can also be utilized for prevention of injuries. For example, you got people out there that might find that a leg or a front squat is just not right for them, so they might decide to opt for a leg press or something like that. So you're choosing a variation in an exercise. So there's so many different ways of you can look at it, but in the most part, like I said, it's just manipulating those variables to create a long-term response to training.
Yeah, that's one of the things you're mentioning, like changing variables and like long-term responses. And I think that's one of the interesting things about training, that there's reasons variation needs to exist, and it's because of the law of diminishing returns. Like if you start to do something, it won't work forever. So that's when you got to potentially change things. So as you keep going with things over and over and over, you're gonna get less response over time. This can be to exercise, this can be to range of motion, tempo, sets, reps, volume, energy systems, whatever. The same principle applies. And then there's magic of you change it up and you get more stimulus out of it. So there's definitely a need for variation. It's definitely something that the more advanced you're on your program, your programming, you definitely need it more. I got there.
And I mean, there's so many different methods out there too. Like we talk about like people that I think a few weeks ago, Conor, you and I were talking about Jordan Peters, how he just basically takes an exercise to the absolute max, like over however X amount of mesocycles, and then he'll change up the exercise because he can no longer progress on that type of movement anymore. But then you got people like Westside who are variation kings. They literally swap and cycle weekly. So you got one aspect of the scale which people will take an exercise months on end, and you got other people that will take it weekly. All right, so there's go Prantik.
Oh, you got me. All right. So, variation, I think, Nick and Connor, I think you guys would agree with me on this. Variation is not only on training, but variation is very important on your diet pattern and the way you're lifting for you to function. By the way you're lifting, I mean your mindset, variation in your mindset, because that's what makes you successful on the long run. So if you're sticking to only one diet, and if it's not working, or sometimes diet may not be suitable according to your meal plan. For example, this I also mentioned previously, and I will tag the previous podcast on which we all were talking about this down below in the description. But this was also mentioned, like, for example, you guys are from Australia, and when where I am originating from, I'm from India. So food regimes, intake pattern is different in these two countries. But that's where I have to bring in variation in my diet plan, just to adapt to a newer pattern of training, a newer pattern of diet, and that is also considered as one variation. What do you guys reckon about that?
I think you're bang on, man. Like, there's so many ways that variation is needed. So for people trying to conceptualize it, you could almost interchange a word with of variation with just change. Like, in the same way you could politically, like, you can be conservative if you want things to stay the same, or liberal if you want it to change. And there's some things that you might want to stay the same. There might be some things you want to change. And some things are just stagnant over time. Big principles always work. Gravity is always going to be there. But for a lot of things in life, nothing works forever. So even like dietary, like, you keep banging away at certain foods, particularly times of stress, like you're mentioning, that won't work for you. Obviously, there's seasonal changes with food as well, and even like just geographically, you might not be able to access, different foods in different parts of the world. I'd love to eat elk meat. I see Joe Rogan talk about elk meat all the time. I still haven't had elk meat. That's just one of the changes and variation I haven't had yet. But it'd be good to at the same time.
What about Ezekiel bread?
Ezekiel bread. You can get that here.
P90 bagel.
P90.
Right? Stuff that I've never had it. But Jay Cutler used to have these. The P90 bagel. So, I don't know what that is, but that's a variation in that. So, yeah.
Yeah. You can change from white bread to Ezekiel bread.
Do you guys find yourself like when we talk about variation with diet, do you guys consistently eat the same foods every single day, or do we consistently hit the same calories but vary our foods daily? How do you guys go about that? I'm curious to see what your guys is, what you guys do.
Conor, go
I've
ahead.
got different answers out of optimality,
variation in cereal boxes,
just freaking life. Yeah. Like, honestly, life is my biggest variation for food. Like, there's no way I'm having the same Friday night meal like multiple weeks in a row.
Yeah.
Like, it might be kebabs one week, HSP the next, and it keeps varying from there. So it varies a ton that way. And just like you, Nick, I know you're the same. Like, you might, and I really like what you're doing there. It's something that listeners can take lessons from Nick from. So what Nick would do, particularly if he's, caloric deficit, he would save room in his diet so he could enjoy his mum's cooking at night. And obviously, mum doesn't cook the same things every night. Or maybe she does, but I'm guessing she changes up here, Nick.
Changes it up, yeah.
Yeah,
changes it up, yeah.
You can kind of have like similar calories, and that's like a stagnant to a degree. I know it's going to vary, but still have change within there. And I think that's one thing you're asking. Dietary wise, there might be times where I purposely change. Obviously, if you're changing goals, you want to lose weight, gain weight, you'll have different things. You could eat similar foods, but sometimes, for example, if you're losing weight, you want things that are more satiating. And sometimes if you're trying to gain you want things, not so satiating. Sometimes
Mm.
you can just bang away certain proteins for too long. Potentially, there's a bit of like research that you might develop like low-grade intolerances and stuff like that, particularly if you're eating during times of stress. So there's benefits to just changing it up, and obviously fruits and seasons. But man, my variation is just freaking life. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
How about you?
Prantik or me?
You.
Either or.
Me? Oh no, like to be honest, like the
You're Greek, so you have every
yeah,
right to speak.
yeah, I know. I mean, yeah, yes and no. Like I'll be consistent where I can, and those like it depends on the day of the week, if that makes sense. So my first half of the week, you know, pretty much everything from 8 o'clock in the morning all the way to 4 o'clock. You know, it's usually dinner is the one that has variation every single day. All right, but during the days and then the last meal of the day tend to be actually quite the same, like the same thing. But if there is that Friday night where I've just gone overboard on those cheese platters and stuff like that, I'll be like, oh, yep, okay.
100 grady.
Might need to cut back on the rest of the day, or so forth. But like, that's just me, and I find it works best. Works well for me. So that yes, there is variation there, a lot, but where I can be consistent, I am, and that's generally breakfast and like that before bed meal and lunch meals and stuff like that. They're usually quite consistent for me.
Yeah, but it's still trackable. That's the cool thing with you.
Yeah, exactly.
In my dietary plans, I might have people say like, I literally do sometimes like this simple, like 100 grams of carbs, and you can do rice, you can do potato, you can do a lot of things as long as it doesn't digestively kill you. You can do these things.
Yeah,
it's still controlled, so you can still change it from 100 to 80 or whatever, and you still get a response.
I remember, fuck. I think it's like even today, like, I think I still got like 100 grams of like. Oh no, it was yesterday. Like I was getting towards the end of the day, and I had like 150 grams of like carbs left. I'm like, fuck. Like it's like 9 o'clock at night, and I'm like, oh, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? It's just like, go grab some dates. Go like literally like five dates and a banana and a protein shake, and I was set. Like it's just shit like that. Like I'm fine. I'm happy to do. Like I said, I am consistent on the calorie side of things, but like because maybe I underestimated what dinner was, and that actually tends to happen. Like sometimes I think I'm gonna eat more at dinner, right? And so I allow for that, and then I get to dinner, I eat. I'm like, oh, maybe I didn't eat as much as I thought I was gonna eat. And I'm like, fuck. Like there's not enough food now, and then I'm like, I didn't cook that much, and I'm like, oh no, okay, all right, 5 dates, 10 dates, I'll just eat that. I'm good to go. Yeah. So I mean, Saturday or Fridays and Saturdays, I tend to have like a drink. So there's some variation there as well. I have alcohol, but I managed to fit that in, and Jesus,
due to legal reasons.
Yeah, so we'll take all the what do you call it, profits. I don't fucking know, but yeah, so I do have a lot of variation, but like I said, be consistent where I can, but that's just my lifestyle. So as Conor says, lifestyle is a variation, 100%.
Yeah back on training. How do you guys, okay, let me just read the question. I'm not going to pretend like I know it off by heart. When is a good time, you guys believe, to employ variation in your training? Prantik, I see you over there.
Okay.
Let's hear your answer.
Okay. What is a good time for implementing variation in your training? Okay. To me, from personal experiences, it depends. It's about time to do variation in your training when you see certain things. For example, if a diet is not working for you, for example, certain diets, as I told you before, people need to customize their diets according to where they're from and what they're used to eating from their childhood. That makes diets easier. That's how you guys do it as well as personal trainers. As far as I remember, Nick said that he asks people what they eat and then he gives them a diet pattern. So based on that, I think variation is very important. If a diet is not really working, by that I mean, for example, you're seeing skin irritation, um, at like negative responses from certain food types. Your body is heating up from the inside, and you're developing uh, blisters and pimples all over your face, back, and stuff. Uh, that's when you know you need variation. It's very natural to do. It's very natural for your stomach to heat up, or your liver to have hard time digesting food when you're really putting on a bulk, for example, a bulk session or something. And certain foods might react to you. I remember Aaron Politis from Australia, and he posted on. He's a pro bodybuilder, the 212 bodybuilder, and he posted on his social media saying that last month he was suffering from a certain type of food which actually took away his appetite. He was only having 2 or 3 meals a day because of that, and he was not being able to train well, so he had to completely cut off an certain type of food and get to the source of it. What was actually going wrong, what was actually bloating him, and then he says he's back on track this month. So, Aaron, if you're listening, you're a great bodybuilder. I really like you and look up to you, and you can come on our show. We want we want you here. Um, but
You got
yeah,
similar physiques in a sense, like kind of short but like huge arms.
he's massive. His proportions
Yeah,
are
yeah.
good and flowing. That's the best thing.
Yeah.
He's got the tapered waist and stuff. So not going into any details, but I see that that's a certain type of variation. I would say adaptation also comes with variation. One of the major things of variation is adaptation. So he adapted to not having those food, and his body adapted as well. And that's how you know you're variating your diet plan and certain things like that. I did the same in my training pattern because I was getting stagnant in certain type of training, and I was seeing results, but I wasn't. It was like, it's not like there's an easy way, but I would say it was like harder. And then when I changed the training pattern, it became a little bit more relaxed for me. My body could take the training and enjoy it while gaining and giving me the advantages from it. So that's also variation in my exercise. That doesn't mean I really gave up on my old exercise pattern. I still get certain parts of my old exercise pattern, but I adapted and variated. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the key parts you said there was just starting to stagnate and then you implemented that change. And I think that's definitely something we can start to look into. So if you are stagnating. All right, Nick. So I think we're asking you, what's a good time to employ variation?
Oh, good question. Honestly, it depends on the context of what we're speaking. So if we're talking about powerlifting or sports specific training, variation is actually better used the further you're away from competition, sport, anything like that, right? So the further away you are from your powerlifting meet, or the further away you are from whatever sport that you do, the more variation you should employ. So for example, I would say a skull crusher. Okay, you're doing a skull crusher exercise, and obviously trying to improve your tricep strength. But the closer you get to your powerlifting meet, you wouldn't necessarily use a skull crusher at that point, because it doesn't resemble much of the pressing movement, which would be a bench press. So you could opt to go for a closed grip bench press, which again targets the triceps, but it almost mimics that bench press movement. So we're now talking specificity here. So the closer you are to a competition, the less variation you would use. So if I'm talking about athlete preparation, you would see, like, I wouldn't say a lot, but like some of the more advanced, like, athletes that are very, have good biomechanics, and for example, they employ a lot of like Olympic lifting, for example. So during an Olympic lift, how that can mimic sport preparations is like triple extension. So, where you're up on your toes, your hips are fully, in extension, and you're basically, your whole body's in extension. So you think of like an AFL athlete, there's a lot of jumping going on and things like that. Those things are very specific for that sport. So when we're using variation, the further you can use that away from competition to advance an athlete, to build muscle, to get stronger, whatever, that's where it's best used. But the closer you are to a sport, the more you want to mimic, that sport, whether that be powerlifting or any kind of sport practice of what you're kind of dealing with that client in general. So that's from that aspect of things, when variation is best deployed.
Conor, your
Very
turn.
nice, very nice. It's my turn. Okay, so variation can be incorporated on a bunch of different time spectrums. So it can be month to month. So you might have like training blocks. So like what Nick was kind of tying to a little bit different, is kind of like segmenting your training. When you're closer towards training, you want to do something more specific, particularly if it's more lift dependent and stuff like that. Then further out, that's a variation from the specific lift. So you can vary along those spectrums. You can vary the type of stimulus in particular on more of a of the internal side of things. It goes more than just exercises. So when you're trying to, I guess if we're talking about the peaking example that Nick was talking, you can kind of reverse engineer. You can be like, okay, these variants are going to be, because if you're trying to get really good at a squat, the best thing to do is a squat for the most part. You want to get good at practicing the lift.
Mm-hmm.
But you might find you're limited by your quads. You might find you're limited by more of your hip strength. You might use a variation to tackle the hip strength or the quad strength, whatever. So that might be a better choice than just more squats per se, because you'd just be accelerating the same issue. So that probably has more value later on, so you can get almost bigger, stronger, address the limiting factor, and as you're closer to the competition, incorporate that new found strength and just incorporate it into the new, better technique. Blah, oh my God. So you can actually vary within the workouts as well. So just like that, you might find certain exercise like a leg extension, for example, they'll target more of a shortened position of muscle, and that will look very different to a sissy squat. They'll vary more of the lengthened position muscle. They're both a knee extension movement, but you get that kind of thing. So it can vary a bunch of ways. So I guess you got to tie it back to, what is the exact goal I want? Has my previous stuff run into law of diminishing returns? And is this change the best thing for me? And then your program design with all the variables can kind of coincide to one specific response with however much or little variation you need.
Very nice and concise answer. Very nice.
Like that. Another thing I like to look at, and again, this is probably more down the route of like sport specific. I like looking at like just simple things like the force velocity curve. So depending on where, so when I look at something like that, all right, so this is more sports science tick, in case you're wondering.
Yep.
So, when you're looking at that curve, basically,
can you explain the curve a little bit? Like what's on the X and Y axis?
Yeah. So the heavier the movement, the slower the velocity, but the higher the velocity, the lower the force production. Okay, so you're going to find a list of different exercises along that spectrum, or along that curve, shall I say. So for example, obviously a goal of a powerlifter is to lift the most amount of weight possible, right? So you're going to find that they're going to be at the top of that curve. Okay. And then you're going to find a bunch of like Olympic lifts ranging all throughout that curve. Okay. I'm just going to say, for example, one of the highest exercises to be listed on that curve in regards to force production. So still got quite a bit of velocity, but more force would be, for example, a clean pull, which is, we all know what a power clean is, correct? Right. So when we see when we see a weightlifter, power clean is to go from basically the floor, catch it, and so forth. Yep. A clean pull, we're not actually going to that catch position.
Is that a snatch? Is that also known as a snatch?
That's another exercise as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
So a clean pull is more force generated, okay, and lower velocity. So you'll find, like, think about Chinese lifters, okay,
Mm-hmm.
they're just like biomechanically like engineered perfectly, for weightlifting. All right, they can move ridiculously fast. Okay, so their objective is to get as strong as possible. So you might find them doing less variation, right, of the higher velocity side of things because they're really, really fast at that movement. But you might see them doing more of the variation of the heavier type movement. So, like, for example, the clean pull, which doesn't incorporate the catch, but it incorporates more of that, that basically that first initiation phase, from the ground basically up to the hips, for example. So, like, basically, like I said, the further you are away from competition,
Mm-hmm.
the less specific you need to be, right? And so if you're someone who's, stronger, but doesn't actually move, or maybe like weaker in terms of like velocity, in terms of speed of movement, right? You should probably focus on, and your goal is to obviously generate more velocity. Probably should, in the off season, work on those variation of movements, right? But then the closer you get to competition, be more specific to that
Mm-hmm.
sport, right? But then, for example, if you do move weight quite quick, right? Then in the off season, your objective is to to continuously get stronger. So then, therefore, those variation of movements should be incorporated in your training regime to then benefit you going forwards. So that's like, again, more of the Olympic lifting side of things, but that can also be looked at in terms of powerlifting as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a neat little curve that you can basically look at, and there's a bunch of different exercises that you can kind of put on that curve as well, and you can really like kind of see, well, depending on where you are at,
Mm-hmm.
right, what you should really be doing, right, that's going to help achieve your ultimate goal down the track, depending on whether you need more velocity training or more
Intensive.
force, more, higher intensity exercise. Because again, variation, like, that can also be manipulated by speed of movement as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's a good explanation. Yep. Yeah. So what is the name of this curve that like you're looking at? Is it a generalized version of it? Like,
just force velocity curve.
okay. False velocity curve. Okay. That's a bit more specific sports science side of stuff. That's actually a very good way to assess yourself and see where you are. So, some examples of variations, shall we? Like what you have implemented throughout your exercise patterns. Let's start with. I would love to ask this question, like some examples of diet variations, because I know Connor is a big food fan, and as long as I've known Connor, this guy loves experimenting with his cereals. So, Connor, give us a little bit, little example of little view, audio view of what your serial experience sounds like, and how has the variation journey been over the years of you and your lovely cereals?
That's good. That's good. So my cereal variation.
My cereal
what?
variation.
When I was a kid, honestly, Cocoa Pops were there. It's fair to say back then, Cocoa
Hey,
Pops
nobody
weren't
knows
working.
about this, so you got to start with your favorites. It's
Yeah,
only
yeah.
us.
So Cocoa Pops weren't working as well for me back then, you could say, as they might do now. I think when particularly lifting, the reason I usually use this is easy, quick, easy to digest, easy to get down carbohydrate source post-training, usually. Just to give a little background to the listeners. I've used Cocoa Bombs. That's the thing in Australia, is gluten-free. But honestly, it's weird. Like, it's actually cheaper. I think it's the stage where it's nearly cheaper, which usually when you're looking for gluten stuff, it's like, oh, can I get a gluten-free pizza? Yeah, no worries. That's me $48. It's usually like a bit of a joke, right? But yeah, I've tried the home brand stuff, and that was a bad variation because, just like going from a squat to a Bosu ball squat, some variations are shit. So I think the home brand Cocoa Pops, not a way to go, guys. So be sure to avoid that. yeah, again, so you employ change and variation when things aren't working as well. So if you get sick of Cocoa Pops, Cocoa Bombs, some Kellogg's, Nutri-Grain, whatever, lad. Yeah, no, you can vary like food in a lot of ways. So I think, psychological factors are always pretty big, so if people want to vary stuff up and, it's going to help them comply, then yeah, go ahead. As long as it, again, doesn't get in the way of you being consistent with your program. I think the next question we're about to talk about, which will kind of tie in from the Cocoa Pop question, is what are some of the issues you see with variation? And one of the issues is you can see people doing it too much, aka program hopping. So a lot of like the issues with like over variation are the issues with like not respecting specificity. Even like when you first, here's a bit of research for you guys. So they had like newbie lifters and they had them adapt to programs, and they tested, how much they grew through each different stage of the program. As much as I talk later on in life, how, adaptations to stimulus kind of get lower and lower. What we found with them, the initial people with hypertrophy, in a 12-week program, they actually grew more weeks 7 to 12 than they did 1 to 6, even though the stimulus was like way more fresh and that essentially had a bigger stimulus at the start. The reason was because a lot of the adaptations were to more of the neural level, more learning the exercise and stuff like that. And you actually start to see the gains after repeating the exercise. Stability, techniques no longer a factor, and you get better and better and better. And that correlates with hypertrophy. For example, so sometimes you just need to battle out a bit longer. And I understand, some of us like our inner West Side in the sense that we want to change things over and over and over, but you will run into those issues. If you're trying to get a good win at one thing, practice it on the skill acquisition side. If you're trying to make gains, you need to progressively overload that movement, or at least a lot of benefits to doing it that way. So particularly the program hoppers, I see people change their complete whole workouts every week. I see them change like every exercise, change the order, change the rep schemes even. And it's just not the way to go. I mean, you want to make sure you can, did my thing work? Well, you need time to see if it works for starters, and a week is enough time at this level of the game. No one gains 5 kilos in a week or whatever,
The comment saying when people do all that, like, what do they generally say? They're like, oh, I'm changing it up right now just to, I don't want my body to adapt. But it's like, that's the goal right now. We're looking for adaptations. It's just like, but I don't want that. Are you sure? But I've been hearing that constant saying for the last seriously 8 years. Like the reason why people change things all of a sudden because I'm trying to not adapt. I don't want my body to adapt to what I'm doing, so I change it up to trick it. That's really their mindset behind it. But I don't know if you guys have heard that, but that's just sometimes a word that gets thrown around, which basically relates to what you're saying. Those people that change their rep scheme every week, change their stimulus of training every week. Like 1 week it's just like all metabolic focus, and then next week let's PB like 1 rep maxes. It's just like the hell, That's Back to what you were like kind of talking about though.
Were you back on podcast?
Yeah. I was just gonna say back to what you were talking about, like people that program hop, those, like for example, most people program hop, like 1 because they either got bored of what they were doing, 2 because they've just ridiculously fuck themselves to the ground, right? And then the following week they're like, I cannot do that again. I may as well just deload again. Most people spend probably like 50 weeks of the year just like deloading because they either fuck themselves too much 1 week and the next week they're just sitting there like crying away, or 2, they're just they're just always changing programs, and whether that week 1 is like an ease in or it is a fuck myself to the ground thing, there's never any kind of growth or movement towards any type of specific goals. It's literally it's literally one thing or like one end or the other kind of thing. And so there's a lot of obviously that issues that come along with that, but it's more so not just psychological. Well, sorry, not just physically, but psychologically as well. Yeah.
Because when you program hop, or at least when you change, like changing block to block can be good because it resensitizes systems. So if you're banging away to hypertrophy for a while, like mechanical tension pathway, and you do something more aerobic or something more neural or something like that, one of the benefits is you're getting adaptations in that way that might transfer. But one of the other things is your thresholds to volume, intensity, basically just everything on the mTOR pathway start to resensitize. So you can get more adaptations out of less. Now, the thing is, when you change every week, you don't get that full resensitization. You need longer than that. You need time for the heart to go fonder in terms of missing it, you know?
It's a very nice way to put it.
The quote kind of worked, kind of didn't,
emotional.
but, you know, we'll give it a
Just
shot.
made me emotional.
Oh, man. Prantik, you cute fuck.
Yeah, that's adaptation.
So, how do you guys like balance your goals throughout the year? When it comes to, you know, how you systematically block it. Prantik, I like hearing you talk.
Balance my goals, even if I have one.
Just you know, when do you get shredded? When do you want to get bigger? When do you focus on being healthier?
To be honest, after I competed last 2 years ago, probably, yeah. And since then I've been fat, so I really don't have any goals of becoming shredded anytime soon. But I don't know if the need be. If I feel like I look at the mirror and then I see, the stomach's coming out. It's probably time. So that's when I set a goal to start adapting to a New York type of diet. I think it's all psychological factors and need-based adaptation that you generally need to do. It's more of a need-based variation. I feel like variation is always need-based. By need-based, I mean like, what's your next motive? Like, you know, why do you want it's the simple question is, why do you want a car? It makes life easier. It gets you from place to place without waiting for a public transport. Stuff like that. Why do you need variation? Because you want to get to a certain goal and you want to achieve it within a certain period of time. Simple answer, period.
Boom.
Boom.
Mic drop. Prantik on the scene.
Tick out.
Tickers tick the box.
I'm going that way.
Right, how do you... Yeah, those arms. So how do we balance stuff throughout the years? Well, again, specificity of adaptation is important. So it's hard to be maximally good at a lot of things at the same time. Like, that's one of the issues with like conjugate style programs. Like, there's too many things you're trying to get good at, and each part of one part of training will interfere with another part of training. So you can do less over here, but you don't resensitize over here, and it's kind of a mess. Like, after you've trained it for 6 months, to be honest. So rather than try and like, okay, improve my 1 rep max, improve my hypertrophy, try and get leaner and more muscle at the same time, there's definitely benefits to directing more overall stimulus and adaptation to a particular goal. Now, when considering all these different goals we have, because usually people, they might be primarily interested in one thing, but we usually like, you know, it's cool to be big, but it's also cool to be strong. It's also cool to be shredded. You know, if we could have it all, we probably would. And
Hulk.
You know, a good athlete will probably stick to their one thing for the most part. But even with like one person trying to gain size, if that's their only goal, there's still benefits to varying within that. Now, as for getting more goals, I'll just answer that more directly now. One thing you got to consider is how different are the different kinds of things you're trying to get good at. So if you're trying to get really good at swimming 1,500 meters, it's more different to powerlifting 1 RM than a just hypertrophy, like 6 to 10 rep kind of thing. Like, there's more variation there. So if you're trying to get good at like 1 RM powerlifting and swimming at the same time, both trainings are going to interfere, like we mentioned before. 100%. So the further out across the year you can kind of spread them away from each other and not let them interfere with each other, the best. And if your goals vary on a smaller level, then the gap in, like, you can be maximally big and then maximally strong not long after. Like it might just take, some neural work, some technique work, and basically all the things involved in strength that aren't so much in hypertrophy. It doesn't take too long because hypertrophy is part of the factor. Again, it's not too far away. So when we're balancing all these things, to kind of answer the question, you might be like, okay, I'm going to get cool all the things I want to that are next door to each other. I'm going to keep them pretty next door in my programming. And the further away it is from that, then I'm going to keep it further away. It's kind of that simple in a sense. So if I'm trying to get to shredded versus maximal strength, they're probably two different parts. I mean, I've tried to do both and it's pretty shit. You kind of just, there's a phrase, you can't sit on two horses with one ass. You kind of fall off like both horses.
Unless you're Chuck Norris.
Yeah. Chuck Norris, good. Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Nick.
What are your thoughts there, Nick?
No, that was good. Pretty much sums it up. So I mean, for me this year personally, it's kind of taken a different direction to what I say I would normally do, just due to my knee injury, which, to be honest, like it set me back like mentally, right? Like for example, I love to deadlift and squat, and the fact that I knew that I just couldn't, right? Like it gave me no motivation to like improve bench. It gave me, really no motivation to just get strong in general. So I mean, like, so to be honest, I just spent most of this year like, rehabbing my knee, just trying to get it to function good, and I progressed there. So you're gonna I'll just say there was a lot of variation with me over the course of this year. I regressed a lot of movements, and progressed with it over the last, what month are we in now? Since December, maybe even January. All right, so I've been able to do squats and things like that over the last couple months. Thing is, like, I would still end up with niggly pain like a couple days later, and it's not fun, right? Yeah, I might be able to do it, within the actual session. A couple days later, may not feel so great, right? And then I had to kind of sit there and like ask myself, okay, there's something else, like there's another underlying issue here, right? So I actually just seek professional advice, and basically I'm on track right now towards getting better at it. And I've noticed that even now, like when I go back to movements such as a squat, right, I find that I can do it and there's no really lasting pains, going forward. So progression in that sense, great, right? The amount of variation of exercises that I've had to do in order to get there, a lot, all right? So this year has basically just been, like a lot of regression and of exercises and training through the variations of that to progress basically back to lifting functionally, through those squat and deadlift patterns, efficiently.
Did you feel like you did a lot of sustenance work, Nick? A lot of sustenance work?
A lot of what, sorry?
Sustenance work. Where you sustain the muscular whatever you gained last year, because of your injury. Yeah. So did you try to?
Oh, like maintenance.
Maintenance. Yeah.
Look, to be honest, like
maintenance to variation. That's what I mean.
Depends. Like, there was a lot of strength work that I was doing, but then there were times throughout the year where I would go through phases of hypertrophy, for example, and I would try and gain some size. So like I was able to do that. More recently I've been able to do that, which is good. But majority of this year was like, when you're talking about sustaining muscle size, like think of it this way, I had a lot of atrophy, right? So basically my legs were a lot smaller at the beginning of the year, the left one considerably.
No calves.
So
yeah.
To be honest, they've actually grown a lot lately. I'm actually quite impressed with myself.
Okay.
So, but like, this year's been more like technique focused, and building a strong base. doing the itty gritty stuff that you just don't want to do, but you just have to do anyway. And I still got to do it. I still got to do it daily. So that's basically been this year in a nutshell. Where I have been putting probably, more of my attention on is again, Conor talk, like we've spoken actually quite a bit about phase potentiation, about things what we're doing now and how it can impact things going forwards. So where I have been able to, have good adaptations with doing is more of that aerobic conditioning kind of work. So I'm doing a lot more metabolic training, whether that's training like a total stimulus or more of a local muscle fatigue stimulus and things like that. So just training in that way, which which will set me up for when gyms for example reopen, and I'm more conditioned to do higher frequency workouts where I'll be like for example I've been basically trying to build my nutrient uptake, so nutrient partitioning, things like that, being able to tolerate a lot more carbohydrates than what I usually have in the past, and so far I've been quite successful at that. So when we go back to gyms, right, and I'm obviously got range of different exercise selection going on here, when it comes to growing, all right, or training for hypertrophy, and obviously sticking to it because I love training. We all love training at a gym and things like that. Just being able to utilize all this thing I'm doing before that, whether it's nutrient uptake, whether it's being conditioned to train high frequency training, or for example, say you do a set of leg extensions, right, and say you get that like burn right before you've really like fatigued that muscle, right? So when you get that like out of breath burn and you're like, fuck, I just can't do anymore, but your muscle could actually probably go a little bit further, right? So more conditioning myself in that way, if that makes sense. Being able to generate more fatigue muscle locally, doing that now, right? Which in turn, like I said, potentiates for when we go back to the gym, where I'd come back to that and I'll be actually better at that movement, be more efficient at that movement, right? Exactly. So that's where I have been able to do things, and progress, now, all right? So that's essentially what, I've been doing, which is, when you think about it, is totally different to what I normally do. But considering I have the time to do it, and that's really what I have good access to doing,
it's not bad, yeah.
Correct.
I think what Nick's talking about with more of your aerobic adaptations, particularly like as relates to hypertrophy and how it can transfer and stuff like that. I think this is one of the interesting things about variation, because something that can yield huge benefits. But if there's any types of stimulus that speaks to variation on the whole, it's that. Because one of the interesting parts you see, and there's even like research with high intensity interval training, like HIIT, like you get big adaptations. Think of how to talk about with hypertrophy for the newbie lifter, how there wasn't much, and then it really kicked off later on. Exact opposite. It's like the law of diminishing returns. Like you get adaptations, boom, 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 and
boom, like
barely any return on investment anymore. And that's like the variation of, okay, we've developed these things, now we need to transfer it. Where if I was going to keep doing this for another months and months on end, again, the return on investment isn't there. And it's probably best to just, if we're trying to get good at a particular thing, there's definitely benefits to figuring out the, underlying roots of that to make it better. Like if you're trying to get powerlifting, you need technique, you need neural, you need hypertrophy, you need all those roots coming to the surface of the tree. Like with hypertrophy, it's one of the roots, but there's also the other roots we've all got to address. And the thing with like super specific training is you're going to miss certain things. But then one of the issues is, of doing too much variation is there's only so much you can recover from or do, or how many adaptations and so many different things you can get at a particular time. I think what Nick was mentioning as well with, used to be like a squat deadlift boy. Now, have you guys heard the phrase like IPF boys by chance?
No.
So IPF is like a natural federation of powerlifting, and they're particularly renowned for doing like super specific training. Like on the whole, it's like, what's your squat variation? Bench and deadlift, you know, like variation is, it's not a West Side thing at all, pretty much. And I was thinking, like, you know, with this whole lockdown, you know, those people are just like, my variation is, you know, going from like sets of 3, you know, wrapped squats to sets of 4 wrapped squats is now like, oh, I'm going to do all this different stuff. And you see some of these people come back with like better body composition, all these different things, because they're just beating down a dead horse just for so long. I mean, yeah, things will work until they don't. And I love to keep things controlled. Like you mentioned Jordan Peters before. Like he has some of the best programming you can do for no phase potentiation.
Mm-hmm.
So his issues of his programming, like I love the guy, it'll always be limited by phase potentiation. It doesn't vary too much or much as it potentially could. Like he'll do like many things within the program, the variation itself, like throughout the week, different rep schemes, top down sets, different exercises. But again, law of diminishing returns will happen there. And as much as like, yeah, you need to keep pushing, you know, we want to get progressively overload and track and get better, you will eventually need these variations. And if you don't, you're going to keep beating that dead horse. You do it too much, you don't get the adaptations, you don't resensitize. And that is why we need variation, but not too much of it. Yeah.
And
all right, we
eternity.
do I send
eternity later.
all right, future Conor. Bang, let's go.
Yeah.
All right, we're back, boys.
Okay.
All right,
One
so variation.
eternity later.
That's SpongeBob thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love SpongeBob. I can do that, but it'll be too loud for listeners. I can't make the sound quiet. There's people upstairs.
Come on, you can do
Make
it.
that sound, and you do that on your throat. You go, ah!
Okay.
Right.
What do you usually do when I'm gone? I wait for you to come back.
We all need a Patrick in our lives, don't we, lads?
Aren't we all Patricks?
I hope to be a Patrick. I hope to be Patrick. You don't want to be a Squidward. Is that his name? Next door neighbor?
Yeah.
Squidward.
Yeah.
He's like
Yeah.
he's like the Eeyore of like fucking SpongeBob.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Dude, I watched it recently.
Shark
Mr.
Girl.
Krabs is funny as shit.
Mr. Krabs.
Yeah.
Oh
Plankton.
my God.
He loves money, man.
Yeah.
Ooh, money.
There's a name I could chuck out, but, you know, legal reasons. Not that legal reason, but other legal reasons. Yeah.
Okay, so
All right.
we're back, and are we wrapping this up?
Yeah. Nah, like that was
We covered
was a
the very nice
sweet-
points.
Yeah, sweet topic today. And we actually kind of basically got across like so much information in regards to, you know, not just bodybuilding, you know, athlete preparation or powerlifting in general, like just
Variation in
your everyday
general.
gym goes. Yeah, variation in general from all facets of life, you know, whether that be your life itself, whether that be training, whether that be nutrition,
Mhm.
you know, we just like, you know, and for the gen population out there, like take as much of that information as you can in, you know, you guys will be taking aspects of, you know, the different topics that we talked about today, and, you know, whatever you can take from that.
And it's
apply
not
it.
only for gym goers or powerlifters, it's for regular people as well, who's out there.
That's what I just said.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Brutal. Keep going, Prantik.
All
I'm
right.
listening.
No, Conor is the one who's ending today.
You've
I will
fuck
massacre
dummy.
you.
So
All right, so
Conor,
we wrapping
what are
this one
your
up?
key takeaways from our session today?
We haven't really talked about this directly, but there's no such thing as a perfect program
Mhm.
because things will stop working and you'll need to change things, aka variation. You need to make sure you're doing things long enough so you can see a response, but you need to also make sure that when you do change, it is warranted and with the right thing. That's going to help you for your future goals and even how those future goals may interlap with each other. So like Nick's talking about with phase potentiation. If you're interested in more of this stuff, you can look at a range of different sources. Like I know RP is good. I know Cass and Hansen good. I know, like, honestly, we're pretty good. Let's give ourselves some clout, boys. You know, come on. Oh, you know, that's so embarrassing. I'm wondering if I should edit this out. You know what? I'm not going to edit this out. The audience can finally know how we don't. And yeah, so employ some variation, spice of life, and, you know,
Spice it
I
up.
don't know how to wrap this up.
Let's
Yeah.
Salt Bay with
Fuck
it.
me. Yeah, this is all getting deleted.
Yeah, but
You just imagine like you're like a cold pigeon. You know?
Thank you for watching the Forge podcast. If you enjoyed it, we'd love for you to subscribe. If you want to find out more about us, check the description. And as always, thank you for listening.